Welcome everyone to episode 3 of Psyclonic. I'm your host, Jek Spacerunner. Very honored today to be joined by Dennis McKenna. Dennis McKenna is an American ethnopharmacologist, research pharmacognosist, lecturer, and author. He has a PhD in botanical sciences and often talks about psychedelic plants and their effects on individual and collective human consciousness. He incorporates shamanism in his work due to his many experiences with psychedelics in South America. Dennis McKenna advocates for the therapeutic and responsible use of psychedelics for personal healing and expanding of consciousness. Thanks for joining, Dennis.
Well, thank you, Jek, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking me on.
Awesome. So I actually wanted to get started by talking about your first psychedelic experience. My first one was with Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds with LSA. I had a very profound experience there. I believe yours was also with LSA. Can you describe your first psychedelic experience?
Well, yes, I can. My first psychedelic experience, as you correctly point out, was with morning glory seeds, not Hawaiian baby woodrose, but the other kind, the Ipomea. Hawaiian baby woodrose will produce a very good effect if you eat 6 to 8 to maybe 15 seeds is kind of the upper level. I don't know how many you ate, but with the other species, you have to eat about 600 seeds. And it wasn't so good for me, to be honest. The first time I tried it, I didn't get very far. I got actually quite sick, and I didn't get much of a psychedelic effect. So I guess my first attempt at a psychedelic launch, if you will, was kind of an abortive trip in some ways. I didn't really have a real full-on psychedelic trip until I took LSD the first time in 1967. I was with my friend from Paonia, Bob Peake. We'd gone out there in the summer of '67 to check out the scene. It was the summer of love, and it was, San Francisco, the Bay Area, was the goal for all these migratory hippies that were moving around the country. And I was one of those, and my brother was living in Berkeley at the time, so that made it easy. And it wasn't hard to score LSD. And we did actually meet some guy on the street that was selling little, I think they were little aspirin tabs actually, but they had a little purple dot in the center of them. So definitely a home lab kind of thing. And but he swore that it was good, and he was as good as his word. It was quite a good dose. My friend and I went up to the hills behind Berkeley and dropped, and we had a great afternoon. So that was really the first of the first times that I actually had a psychedelic experience.
Excellent. Yeah, I would definitely recommend LSD or psilocybin for the first time for people. For mine with LSA, like I had about 7 or 8 of the seeds. I had a lot of nausea, but I was able to manage through it and did have a very positive experience. But yeah, it's good mentioning that LSD was really the first one for you where it was effective.
Yeah, it was effective. Not the morning glories were not so much. I've subsequently taken Hawaiian baby woodrose, and it's nice. I mean, it's a good solid psychedelic. It doesn't seem to carry the same impact that LSD does. It's not quite that profound. At least it wasn't for me. But as far as producing an effect that lasts a good long time and is really quite enjoyable, I'm surprised more people don't use baby Hawaiian woodrose because it delivers on those fronts, But I guess there are other things now more easily available. But yeah, I I do not disrespect it. It's a good psychedelic.
Absolutely. So, sort of putting psychedelics aside for a moment, what are some other ways that are known for people to alter their consciousness?
Well, you know what they are. There are all sorts of ways to alter consciousness. Yoga, obviously, all sorts of shamanic practices, meditation, ecstatic drumming, sound immersion, breathing exercises. Well, holotropic breath work is a good example that was invented by Stan Grof, who was the pioneer in LSD research. But when that work became illegal, he invented holotropic breathing, which is basically a kind of a way of controlled hyperventilation. But it can get you to some pretty far out places, some pretty psychedelic places. Deep meditation can do that as well. And then, of course, a lot of things involving sound, like sound immersion. Sound therapy is now very popular. It's very compatible to doing with medicines, but you don't have to do it with medicines. It's effective by itself as well. So, the techniques that are available for altered consciousness are, numerous, and they've been available to us for thousands of years, most of them. So psychedelics are just one of those paths to, to the other side, if you will, or to altered states, and obviously compatible with some of these practices like sound and psychedelics can lead to really profound experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. I would suggest people check out the Wim Hof method. It's a sort of holotropic breathing technique. And then I also use binaural beats. If you're familiar with those are very helpful. Mm-hmm.
Yes, binaural beats, the Wim Hof method. And binaural beats is just another one of these sound methods. I'm going to put in a sound practitioner that I work with and that I like, that I actually admire his work a lot. Sound, it's supposed to be one word, sound meditation. That's his website, and I don't know if it showed up as a clickable link, but anyway, my friend Alexandre Tanu, who's been doing this for a number of years and does work with and without medicine. So there's good information on that website about sound and everything about sound. He is like a genius when it comes to understanding sound. So there you can find information about the neurophysiology, brain scans of people who are hearing different sounds, the mathematics of sound, the history of sound. It's a very rich site for people that want to dig deep. So yeah, definitely recommend that site.
Thank you. I'll be sure to include that link in the description. So you're definitely no stranger to the idea that changing your consciousness is something fundamental to human nature, to being just an organism, really. And we require the ingestion of food and water from the environment to survive every day. And to paraphrase Salvador Dali, we are literally made of drugs. Also, DMT, the most potent psychedelic, seems to be endogenous to the human body, perhaps in the pineal gland. What is your response to those who would say the psychedelic experience is invalid because you have to take an external substance into your body and you can't initiate it on your own volition?
Right. Well, I think you just answered it. The fact is, as Salvador Dali says, and as I'm fond of saying, we are made of drugs. We are biochemical machines, essentially, that run on drugs. Those drugs are neurotransmitters and hormones and other types of signaling molecules in the system. I mean, biological systems are basically set up for signal transmission. and transduction, and the brain is really specialized to this with their networks of neurons, all mediated by neurotransmitters. So my response to the people that say, a drug experience is not a genuine experience because you take something into the body, overlooks the fact that all experience is a drug mediated experience because it's mediated by this system of neurotransmitters and the brain, receives information from the outside, takes that in through sensory portals, processes that with memories, associations, and other types of internal processing, and basically extrudes a model of reality, which is the reality. Sometimes I call it the reality hallucination that we inhabit. And that is not reality itself. Reality itself is probably unknowable, but what we experience subjectively is this reflection of reality or a model of reality. And a lot of what the brain does in constructing this model of reality, which is sometimes called these days, in the jargon of neuroscience now, it's called the default mode network. What the brain does is filter out a lot of information that's not immediately relevant to our survival. So what you get is a kind of impoverished model of reality, but it's very practical. Lets in the essential information, filters out what's not immediately relevant, and the benefit that comes from that is that you can comprehend what is going on. You're in an ordinary state of consciousness, and so-called ordinary consciousness. Of course, by definition, just being conscious is an extraordinary thing. But what psychedelics do is they can temporarily disable this default mode network, or this interpretive function that's creating this model of reality for us to inhabit. It can let us step out of that reference frame temporarily and view ourselves, our existential situation, or just the world that we inhabit from a different perspective. And I think a lot of what the therapeutic benefits of psychedelics are the fact that they let you distance yourself. They let you step out of your reference frame temporarily. And that can be very therapeutic in terms of understanding your existential situation effectively, whether, you're struggling with addiction or depression, PTSD, maybe you're in a terminal state. All of these things tend to be sources of a great deal of anxiety and dysfunction. And the fact that you can step away from these and look at them through a different lens, so to speak, understand them from a fresh perspective, that's tremendously beneficial when you're trying to get to the root of these problems. And I think that's mainly where psychedelics can really make a difference, really facilitate. There's no other class of drugs that's used in psychiatry that does this. Most of the psychiatric drugs are not directed towards solving your problems. They're just, or getting insights into your problems. They're just directed toward lessening the impact. They're more like Band-Aids than any actual solution. So that's why I think psychedelics are so, such really a game changer when it comes to mental health care. The challenge is to integrate these substances into medicine in a way that, maximizes their benefits basically and minimizes their side effects, their unwanted reaction. And of course, that's where this all important dynamic of set and setting comes in. You can't just take these things, or you shouldn't, I guess I should say, take these things casually. You should pay attention to the circumstances, and proceed carefully and thoughtfully. Not that they can't be, it doesn't necessarily have to be a therapeutic situation. It can be just from the standpoint of expanding consciousness or understanding yourself better without necessarily linking that to some pathology. But the important thing is you just have to do it thoughtfully. In other words, there are some situations where it's obviously not appropriate to take psychedelics. I would say on the freeway at 70 miles an hour, you probably don't want to take a psychedelic there. But other situations, it's really up to an individual how they want to structure their experience. The importance is there needs to be a structure of some kind, appropriate setting and then set. And set is what you bring to the table. Set is everything you are, really, all your life experience as well as your expectations. But your mindset is really, in some ways, the most important part of the equation. The setting is just some, the circumstances you take it in. You want that to be appropriate so that you can. So that that you're safe, you're not going to have to really deal with any real world things while it's going on. The cable guy is not going to come, the phone is not going to ring. And once you've set all that up, and then that's really what you need to do. And then if you have an appropriate setting, then let it happen, and that's another big sort of aspect of using these things. You have to trust the medicine. You have to trust yourself enough to trust the medicine. And in the experience, or, you have to resolve to, you have to basically surrender to the experience and not push back. Sometimes there can be a tendency to push back. Some of the things that come up are challenging. They can induce anxiety or even panic, and this is one reason why having a good sitter or guide or someone there, either, and it can be a shaman or a therapist, it can be just a trusted friend, depends on how you're doing it. I mean, there's some, in ayahuasca, for example, these are usually done in group sessions with a curandero or a facilitator is the word they like to use now. And that can be very helpful. It can be quite useful to have someone who is in the room helping you. Mostly just being there is good, but that you're looked after. So if you get really anxious, that person can help reassure you and bring you back to some kind of a place of calm. And of course, we can do this ourselves. It's just a matter of how you think, if you meditate, that sort of thing. It's a matter of, kind of finding your center, and being comfortable there while whatever is happening is raging around you.
Right. Yeah. We really can't emphasize enough this concept of set and setting. The set that you do it in can really make or break your experience. And I know your brother would often recommend silent darkness. That's worked for me a lot, although you can turn on the lights if you want to as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then the mindset that you bring to it is so important. You want to not do it on the spur of the moment. I will often prepare mentally weeks in advance, just make a mental note. I'm going to be doing this in a few weeks. Just get ready, get ready to surrender to this. This is coming. Definitely would recommend people do that. You touched on modern psychiatry there. The psychiatric institutions now, like you said, they tend to just give people a pill and send them out the door. Often the antidepressants that are used, like Prozac or Zoloft, are just dealing with people's symptoms, whereas psychedelics can heal the root cause. Can you talk about modern psychiatry and how psychedelics can be implemented in some of the work you're doing there?
Well, Yes, I can. I should make it clear. I'm not a therapist myself. I don't administer medicine to people and act as a guide or anything like that. What I have done, what I continue to do, is organize ayahuasca retreats and that sort of thing. But then for those events, I let the curanderos do the job. I'm just the person that helps organize it. I think right now there's a lot of excitement about psychedelics as they're beginning to be accepted into mainstream medicine, or, many therapists are excited at the prospect, but it's a challenge. It's complicated because it doesn't fit into uh, any current approaches to mental health care, which uh, in some respects are constrained by economic considerations. What is insurance going to cover, for example, for people that want these kinds of legal therapies? What you know, so in order to make psychedelics work in biomedicine, in a medical context, you really have to change uh, the way that psychiatry is structured, because what they call on, what they require, is a lot of intensive time and investment on the part of the therapist, right? Uh, Hours during the sessions, sometimes days of preparation before the sessions, and then days after the session to help people integrate and understand their experiences. Therapist time is the most expensive aspect of any medical treatment. So we have to change the economics of it in such a way that to allow for that, so that the way that psychiatric medicine is done today, a lot of the reason that it is pretty much rely on the take two and call me in the morning kind of model is just for economic reasons. So you got to reverse that equation. You have to realize that the expense of the treatment is not the drug. The drugs are not expensive. It's the time that has to be set aside to create these tailored set and setting situations. And so that's one reason why group settings are good, and a more traditionally structured kind of shamanic type session is one approach. Because similar to ayahuasca retreats or mushroom retreats, you can treat multiple people in that situation, and that lowers the costs overall. Plus, you're part of a community of people that are undergoing this experience. So they prepare together and they have the experiences together, and then they can help integrate together. And in doing our retreats in South America with ayahuasca, we found that works very well. We generally do 10-day retreats, and we're doing them in the Sacred Valley of Peru, or we have been before COVID hit and shut everything down. But our custom was to do them in the Sacred Valley of Peru, where all the Inca ruins are, and people would come. And for the first 4 days, we'd just play tourists. We'd go around, look at some of these sites, travel together, and really develop a beautiful group dynamic among the people. All of these strangers, come to Cusco, and we all get to the hotel. The first morning after everyone gets there, you look around at the people there and you say, my God, I paid all this money and came all this way to throw up with these people. But the beautiful thing is, in that first few days before we even bring the medicine into it, you get this beautiful group dynamic happening as they're enjoying, this cultural experience. So that when you start with when we retreat finally to the retreat center for the last section of it, we do 3 sessions. Each session is separated by a day for reflection and integration. And by the time people get to the retreat center, there's a great bond that's formed. Everybody is friendly. We know each other. We've got this good group dynamic going, and that really helps sustain people through the experience. So I really think that that's kind of the model that psychiatry needs to look at. It's much more of a, and this is how it's done in indigenous societies, and this is how it's always been done. But there's a reason for that. This works, and people that do it in this indigenous way, they've learned how to do this, and I know it works because I've seen people have real breakthroughs when they go to these programs. So that's one way to do it. I think that I'm very encouraged by the decrim movements that are happening in different parts of the country, because that opens up the possibility that these local retreat centers that are maybe already using plant medicines, but they're doing it underground, they're doing it covertly, they could move out of the shadows, they could operate in the open, and then basically say, we operate as a center for wellness, for psychedelic therapy, and among other therapies, we can offer psychedelics, guided psychedelic experiences, modeled after traditional experiences, but of course, also different because we're not indigenous. But we can take a page from their playbook, adapt it to our own needs, and create something that's viable and something that works for us as Western 21st century people.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think we're headed in that direction. And that's the thing about psychedelics. You can fit really a whole lifetime of treatment into one session, and you really only need like a few sessions a year. And some people only need 1 or 2 sessions their whole lifetime. You can't really make so much money off of that. I think that's what you were saying.
Yeah. There's not really a revenue model there. The revenue model is in the therapeutic side, but yeah, and it's a good point. Some people take these things maybe once or twice in a lifetime, and it's good. It gives them, it makes positive changes that can be quite long lasting. A few times a year is probably about the right frequency. So I'll be interested to see what happens. It's beginning to happen in some states where, for example, Oregon has passed an initiative that you can use psilocybin mushrooms in a therapeutic situation, and that's a statewide initiative. So other states are going to start doing that as well. So soon, I hope that a person can find resources to have these experiences with natural medicines in anywhere they go. You don't have to leave the country to find it.
Great. I want to see if you could touch on an issue that was very close to me growing up as a kid, and still is with children today, and that is the proliferation of these ADD and ADHD diagnoses. And a lot of times they're just being prescribed Ritalin, and I'm not sure this is such a good idea for children. Can you compare Ritalin to methamphetamine and talk about that subject briefly?
Yeah, a little bit. Well, Ritalin and methamphetamine, which is also a stimulant, and is the basis of Adderall. I think Adderall is not methamphetamine; it's dextroamphetamine, but the same thing. Methamphetamine is available also as a prescription drug, and I forget the name of the prescription drug, but it's used this way. Ritalin too. These things, tend to have a paradoxical effect on people diagnosed with ADHD or ADD, in that it helps them focus attention, and they often, have difficulties with that. So a stimulant you would think would have the opposite effect, but for some reason it helps them focus attention. So that's kind of the therapeutic goal with these stimulants. ADHD drugs, but the downside of it is it also maybe discourages spontaneity. I think anytime that you're talking about medicating children, medicating young people for a long time with, for sometimes many years, you have to look at that very carefully, because it can have a therapeutic use, and for some people it's very helpful. But there is a tendency, as you probably looked into this, there's a tendency to overprescribe Ritalin for anybody in school that maybe is a little bit social disruptive or not behaving, as expected within the constraints and so on. The danger of that is that some people just don't operate that way. They don't fit into a rigidified classroom situation, for example, and maybe they have maybe they have just as much creativity and other things work for them, but sitting in desks and looking at books and that sort of thing, maybe they want something more compatible to the way they experience the world, something involving movement, for example, this sort of thing. So I think that the overprescription of Ritalin, which I guess is still going on, I mean, it's certainly been looked at, is unfortunate. It's kind of it's kind of an admission that we cannot there's almost a mandate to suppress people's individuality and spontaneity, and there's behind this whole thing, you're effectively using the pharmaceutical to re-engineer your personality, to fit more in conformity with not your own expectations necessarily, but those of your teachers and the authorities. So it's definitely a two-edged sword. I mean, I do know people that have claimed that Ritalin really kept them on track, really helped them very much, and other people who say, well, it didn't really. They felt constrained and eventually gave it up. So it's complex. It's a complex issue, and it's like all issues related to the use of any of these psychoactive drugs. There are appropriate ways to use them and not appropriate ways to use them. There are beneficial ways and harmful ways to use them. The drugs themselves simply have the properties they have. So I'm fond of saying there's no such thing as a bad drug. There's all sorts of bad ways to use drugs, and that's what we have to recognize, that, the moral aspects of drug use, whether prescribed by physicians or whether people go for it on their own to use these substances, the moral aspects comes from within us, whether it's right or wrong, used appropriately or destructively, that all comes from within us. The drugs are simply molecules or plants. They have these effects, and it's what we do to the effect with the effects that make the difference. Again, going back to this most important thing about set and setting. That's why it's so important to make sure the setting and the sets are appropriate. So
Yep, thanks for that. Very important information there. So I think this is a good time to talk about the opioid epidemic. I see a prevalence in my age group and amongst communities suffering from the pharmaceutical opioid overdose epidemic, which is still raging right now, to think the only solution is to stop doing all drugs. And that,
Mhm.
but I feel that that mentality actually is the source of the problem for why it's happening. Um, can you talk about some of the benefits and advantages of using psychedelics to help end the opioid epidemic?
Yes, I can. So psychedelics are therapeutically useful for a number of substance use disorders, if you want to use that term. Opiates and alcohol being the main one, also sometimes cocaine, and they can, and even tobacco. You may be aware of studies with psilocybin and smoking cessation, where it shows spectacular results in several clinical trials done at Johns Hopkins in people who have been long-term cigarette addicts, 3 packs a day for many, many years, impossible to quit. And after one or two relatively high dose sessions with psilocybin, with the right preparation and follow up and so on, the response rate in getting people in that category to quit smoking has been 86%. Which is persistent, 86% after 6 months, and the benefits continue. So that totally blows away any other kind of anti-smoking regimen. Psilocybin is incredibly effective for this. The other addictive drugs like opiates and cocaine and alcohol also have a similar effect. There's needs to be more work done on it. Back in the 60s, there was a lot of work done with LSD in alcoholics that showed that it was quite efficacious. And again, it comes back to this ability to step out of your reference frame, to step out of this default mode network when you take the psychedelic and really examine your relationship with this substance, whatever it is that's bothering you, because that's what it is. It's a relationship, and people should be as careful with, like it's like relationships with people. You choose your friends carefully. You should choose your drugs carefully, because you have to recognize that you're choosing to have a relationship with something that you're going to take frequently. And I think we have to lay a lot of the blame at the medical community. There's a tendency for physicians to overprescribe these things, especially opiates, and in the same way that psychiatry, really relies much too much on SSRIs, because that's the pharmaceutical du jour. That's what's available. So you have a problem, and next thing you know, you go out of the door with a prescription for an SSRI. Doesn't really get to the problem, not really adequate, but this is the expectation that a lot of people have, and it's the expectation that, because of access to insurance and so on, that's often the outcome. And the same with the opiates. Doctors are much too quick, I think, to prescribe opiates, and not enough education about how to approach them and follow up in terms of, if you're going to take an opiate, it can be amazingly beneficial if you have chronic pain or this sort of thing. But it is a relationship, so you have to think carefully about how you define that relationship. How are you going to engage with this drug that can be very helpful, can also turn on you if you don't use it, if you don't use it in an appropriate way. I think it's very interesting that I don't know if you've read Michael Pollan's latest book called, what is it, Your Mind on Plants, I believe it is. And he talks about the opium poppy. He resurrected number of articles he wrote back in the 90s. And it's interesting, the garden variety ornamental poppy, which is everywhere, and almost all people's gardens have a few poppies. That is the opium poppy, actually. People don't necessarily know that, but some do. And potentially, so this could be viewed as a huge drug problem, right? You could say, my God, opium poppy, it's all over the country. Terrible. People are going to abuse this if this work comes out. But the fact is, you could also say, this is not part of the opiate problem. This is part of the opiate solution in a certain way. You could say, well, okay, so you're on a prescription opiate, and you want it, you're getting relief from that, but you don't want to be addicted to an opiate. You don't necessarily want to, pay for the opiate for the rest of your life. Well, guess what? If with a little bit of knowledge, you could go into the garden and harvest your opium poppies and make tea out of them, out of the stems or out of the poppy seeds or whatever, and get a much milder opiate, less addictive, that might actually fill the bill. And it's not a pharmaceutical. You don't have to spend money on it. And I think that this is, this is good for people to realize that. Knowledge is always dangerous, but knowledge is also empowering, So from that perspective, knowing that, opium poppies are actually quite common, some people will understand that, if they need a good pain reliever, this is potentially, a good source of that. Other people will realize that and say, wow, I could go, make my own opium, which is true. But just because you got it from an opium poppy that you grew in your garden doesn't mean you won't get addicted to it. Again, it's all about the way we use them. These plants, these drugs simply are what they are. It's the way that we use them. And that takes clarity, that takes thoughtfulness about the relationship, that you choose to have. People can use opiates and do use opiates for years and years without actually being addicted, without being, it's the drug itself is not particularly harmful to your physiology. I mean, I'm not advocating that everybody should go out and grab their opium poppies and grind them up and take them. I'm not really promoting that, but I'm just saying it is possible. And if you have, some medical need where you can need an effective pain reliever, this might be helpful, along with other types of therapy, so on. So, ultimately, how to use these substances comes down to the individual choice, as it should be, I think. I do not believe in prohibition of any plant or any fungus or really any drug. I don't think prohibition works. I think what works is education. And that's the whole thing. You have to come to these things from a place of from an informed place. You have to educate yourself about these things, about the pros and the cons, and the challenges and the benefits, and do it thoughtfully. And if you do that, you can develop relationships with any medicine. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be psychoactive even, but you can develop relationships. The important thing is to be informed about what you're doing, and then acting on that, act with thoughtfulness. That's the thing.
Yeah, prohibition really acts as its own miseducation program. I agree with you. I think adults should have access to pretty much any plant or substance, and there should be a parallel with that, very informative and truthful and ambitious educational parallel to that. But
this is where drug education totally has failed, has fallen down, because the whole message with drug education is don't use drugs, right? I mean, that's basically the message. And that's going to fall on deaf ears in a lot of places. The message should be how to use drugs, and that is all sorts of, there's going to be political backlash and all that to that kind of thing. But that's what should be taught. And it should be no more controversial than saying, we don't expect people to drive without knowing how to drive, without learning how to drive. Same way with alcohol, we encourage responsible use. What does that mean? Basically, it just means being conscious about how you use it and what is too much, what is appropriate, what isn't. And all of these should be discussed, if they want, the powers that be want effective drug education, they have to create these mechanisms where the discussion is not whether or not people should use drugs. Some will choose not to, and that's fine. Let them go do that. Others will make choices, maybe to use one. So they should go into it from an informed place, and that's the key thing. And so drug education has got to, stop propagating misinformation, start propagating real information. Ultimately, that's going to save lives.
Now, before we get to the McKenna Academy, because I want to wrap up with that, there's another non-psychedelic substitute to opioids that's making some headway. That's Mitragynine speciosa, or kratom. What have you studied about kratom and its potential to solve the opioid crisis? And have you tried it yourself?
I have tried it. It doesn't have much of an effect on me. I think maybe I've not taken enough of a dose. But kratom is another example. I mean, it is not related to poppies. It's not related to that family at all. It's a completely different family. But the alkaloids in mitragynine are opiates, and they do stimulate. They hit the opiate receptors, particularly the mu receptor, which is where both the euphoria and the addiction and also the analgesic effects of opiates is mainly in that receptor. Mitragynine or kratom is a good example. Again, it's not part of the drug problem when it comes to opiate. It's actually part of the drug solution. And because in Southeast Asia, where it's been used traditionally, it's traditionally taken by people who may be on heroin or may be addicted to heroin or opium, and they want to taper off. It makes it possible and easier for them to do that. Something remarkable about the mitragynine alkaloids is that they don't suppress respiratory functions like conventional opiates do. So the reason people die from opiate overdoses is because it suppresses respiration. And the mitragynine alkaloids actually don't do that. They have the opiate-like effect, but they lack that property. Why the pharmaceutical industry is not already all over this, I'm not sure, because they're natural products and there's concern about patenting. But in fact, a lot of time in opiate, drug development has been to find an effective opiate that is not toxic, that doesn't cause overdose due to respiratory depression. Ideally, also one that's not addictive. But I think that's probably impossible, because I think, the addiction goes right along with the therapeutic effect. But people should, kratom is in Southeast Asia where it's used, it's not a public health problem. People use it to help them cope if they have opiate addiction. They also use it for work. They use it for daily life. It's not particularly a problem in an herbal form. In a natural form, I think it's fine. It's one of those things where, the use of them becomes more problematic they become more easily abused. Every step you take to refine it, purify it, turn it into, transform it from a plant into a drug, and we see that very much with coca, the same thing. Coca is the source of cocaine. Cocaine is a shitty drug, basically. I mean, it has terrible effects. People shouldn't even take it based on the, on the moral aspect of, the geopolitical aspects of coca. If you take cocaine, you're really contributing into the whole network of narco-terrorism, and so just on that level alone, it's good to stay away from cocaine. Coca, on the other hand, is completely benign. I mean, it's about as addictive as green tea, and it's very, in the traditional context where it's chewed, it's just a part of daily life, very much like coffee is in our culture. It's not it's not in any way a serious drug abuse problem, in used traditionally. And in fact, it's actually very beneficial to the people because it's full of vitamins and minerals, proteins, all sorts of nutrients besides the tiny amounts of cocaine that it contains. So this is a good example where you take a perfectly benign plant and a beneficial plant, and by extracting the so-called active ingredient out of it, you come up with something that's much more dangerous and more difficult to use in a beneficial way. So this is again, we can, this is one argument to use the more natural forms of these drugs. They're inherently less dangerous.
Right, absolutely. And me personally, I've tried kratom. I've tried to use it for a few months. I found it to be excellent for a pre-workout and just giving me energy. The one issue I had is just it's one of the worst tasting leaves I've ever tasted. It's so bitter.
Yes.
It's almost like nature did that on purpose so you don't indulge in it too much.
Well, the same could be said of most alkaloids. I mean,
Right.
one of the things about alkaloids is they're bitter by and large. So to an animal, well, we're animals, but to an animal, many animals will avoid consuming a plant because it's bitter. We've reversed that equation. Sometimes if we detect bitterness in a plant, we think, oh, bitter equals alkaloid equal, maybe you can smoke it, or maybe you can get high off of it. So it encourages experimentation. But yes, kratom is one of the more bitter plants that you'll ever encounter. I agree, but that's just a signature for there's something there.
Right. So getting to the end of the hour here, so I wanted to make sure we get to something I'm very excited about, project of yours that's been developing quite significantly. That is the McKenna Academy of Natural Philosophy. I really feel there's an importance for philosophy to make a comeback. You don't even hear the word said that often anymore. People will make fun of it, say it's impractical or a waste of time. Can you talk about the Academy and the title, adding natural philosophy in there?
Sure. Well, the Academy, yeah, by definition, our focus is education. And most of what we're looking at is education around plant medicines. If you look at our website, we've got a number of projects underway. We're doing documentaries in Peru, involved in a documentary project about traditional medicine there and the current state of the art of that practice in the post-COVID, post-ayahuasca, post-globalization era. Traditional medicine is still very vibrant. And so we're doing that. We call that Bionosis Project. We're organizing another symposium in next May or June in the UK to complement the first ESPD 50 conference that we did, you may have heard of. in 2017. Well, this summer we're doing ESPD 55 because it's not been 5 years since we've done that. So that's in the hopper. We actually have a lot of educational projects going. We just completed a 6 weeks ethnobotany course, virtual ethnobotany course taught in conjunction with the Organization for Tropical Studies in Costa Rica. So that was a great course. We got very good response from that. So basically, you know, the McKenna Academy has been forced to do a lot of things online because of COVID. Originally, we wanted to do more physical conferences and retreats and that sort of thing, and we hope to get back to it. But right now, we're doing what we can online. And the natural philosophy part of it is kind of just natural philosophy is what science was before it became reductionist. You know, it's what science emerged out of back in Elizabethan period. Francis Bacon and those people kind of invented the scientific method. But science has lately become, you know, they like to exclude anything that is not quantitative, and it's very reductionist in its approach to understanding nature. I don't, you know, I don't discount science. I think it's a very important tool for understanding nature, but it needs to also recognize that there are other ways of knowing, you know, and that's where natural philosophy comes in. So natural philosophy is a little looser, kind of conceptual framework, I guess you could say, that is larger than science, that encompasses more. There's so much about existence, so much about the universe that we don't understand and that we may never understand. And it's not legitimate to say, well, only what science understands is legitimate real knowledge. I mean, I don't think you could say that, because for one thing, it's important to remember science understands very little about practically everything. You know, it tends to be a discipline that is very good on focusing on very narrow aspects of existence, aspects of the universe, not so good at relating all these things together into some kind of coherent worldview. And that's why I like natural philosophy as a name. It's a bigger context. It recognizes science, but it also recognizes the limitations of science. And one lesson I get from psychedelics, I think many people do, is just a recognition, really, of how little we really know, you know, about practically everything, you know. And science can get quite arrogant about what it knows, you know, but that's a dangerous thing, because the power of science and the scientific method is to recognize when you're wrong, you know. And that's why one constructs hypotheses. And then once you constructed hypothesis, you try like hell to dismantle them, to disprove them. In that way, you advance knowledge, and you either throw those ideas out, come up with something completely new, or you modify your theories to make them conform more to what your observations are. So science is very powerful, but I think it should happen within the context of natural philosophy.
Yeah, you definitely have to be careful not to go into scientism, where science becomes your religion.
Right, exactly. Science should not be, science should, and there is a tendency to do this, especially on the part of scientists, you know, and they're as guilty as atheists in a certain way. There's nothing wrong with saying that our knowledge is limited, you know. I mean, it's okay to say we don't know, you know, and that's a very honest statement. And yeah, you don't want science to become another religion. Science is simply a tool. If it's properly it's a cognitive tool for asking questions of nature that can get meaningful answers back, and it should not be itself deified, or it's just a tool. We should approach it and use it that way, which is not a disrespectful thing. That's the way it's intended to be used.
Alrighty, so before I let you tell the listeners where they can find you, I actually wanted to read a quick quote from your website.
Sure.
As a species and as individuals, we stand at the threshold of a critical moment in human history and perhaps in the survival and continued evolution of life on Earth. Those of us in this community, those who have heard and heeded the message from Gaia's ambassadors, the plant teachers, are faced with a daunting responsibility as well as a great gift. So thank you, Dennis, for coming on. I seriously appreciate your time. I see you as a pioneer and a legend for the psychedelic community. Is there anything you're currently working on or want to promote, and where can people find you?
Well, right, I put it in the text box, just www.mckenna.academy, and you can write to that if you're interested in particular thing. You could write to connect at McKenna, spell it, and somebody will respond, and we welcome all sorts of feedback, volunteers, etc., etc. We have an accumulating body of talented people who want to pitch in various ways, and I should mention that we're also a 501c3 nonprofit, so you can send money and get tax deductions if you have money, if you want to do that. And we're doing fundraising, of course, on other fronts as well. But check out our website and look at the resources and the events page on that website to get an idea what we're doing. And access to most of these is open access, so people can browse around there and see what we're up to.
Excellent. I'll be sure to include all of those links. So
Okay.
Very excited for what the Academy has to offer here in the future. You're going to be paying attention to those websites. Thanks again for joining, Dennis. Seriously appreciate it.
A great pleasure, Jek. Thank you so much for having me. Let me know when you've got it posted so we can share it with our social media
Excellent.
platforms.
Will do.
Yeah.
Will do.
Oh, okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right, my friend. Have a good day.
Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.